Picture this. You're trekking through the Himalayas' majestic peaks all around. Pretty inspiring, right?
It's a dream for a lot of folks, but the reality of trekking in Nepal, it can be a lot tougher than Instagram makes it look.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we're here today, to break down some of those common misconceptions and help you avoid making those rookie mistakes.
Exactly. We're diving into an article by David Ways. He's a guidebook author, and he spent years trekking and writing about Nepal, so his insights are invaluable for anyone even thinking about setting foot on those trails.
Right. The article we're looking at is called The Most Common Questions and Mistakes About Trekking in Nepal. And it was just updated in February 2025. So the information is fresh.
Very fresh.
So let's jump right in. One of the first things David tackles is this idea that Nepal is a budget destination.
Yeah, that's a misconception that can really backfire on you. Nepal used to be known as a super affordable place to travel, but costs have gone up significantly in recent years. So trying to do everything on a shoestring budget, well, it can actually end up costing you more in the long run.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to skimp on the essentials, like a qualified guide, for example.
Absolutely. That's one of the first questions David addresses in his article. Can I trek without a guide to save money? He's heard it a million times, and he's got some pretty strong opinions on the matter.
Well, he's the expert, so let's hear it.
He makes it very clear that hiring a qualified guide is not just about luxury, it's about safety. It's about having someone who knows the trails, who speaks the language, who can handle logistics, and who can basically make sure you have a smooth and enjoyable experience.
Makes sense. It's like having a Sherpa for your life.
Exactly. And he shares this story about an Australian trucker who decided to hire a porter, hoping he could double as a guide. Figure out two birds with one stone, save some money.
Sounds tempting.
Yeah, in theory. But it turned out the porter's English was quite limited, and he was actually spending most of his evenings indulging in a bit too much of the local spirit.
Oh, no. So the trekker was basically left high and dry.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a good situation.
It's a good reminder that sometimes those shortcuts can end up being the long way around.
And a potentially dangerous one, especially when you're talking about trekking in the Himalayas.
Speaking of dangerous shortcuts, what about this question of shortening treks? Trying to cram a 10-day trek into 5 days.
That's another big known.
David is very adamant about this. You cannot rush acclimatization. Altitude sickness is a real danger, and trying to push yourself too hard can land you in a very serious situation.
Yeah, altitude sickness is nothing to mess with. I've heard some pretty scary stories.
And it's not just about your own health either. Remember that helicopter rescue scam that's been in the news?
Oh yeah, where people are faking altitude sickness to get a free helicopter ride down.
Exactly, which is not only unethical, but it's driving up the cost of rescue for everyone and making it harder for those who genuinely need help to get it.
It's like crying wolf. Eventually people stop taking you seriously. And in this case, the consequences can be deadly. David actually mentions a couple from Singapore who had to turn back from the Everest base camp trek because the husband got really sick from altitude sickness. They were trying to do the whole trek in just 9 days.
Wow, 9 days. That's crazy, even for someone in top shape.
Right, you can't just rush Everest.
Well, it sounds like David is pretty clear on these points. Don't skimp on a guide, and don't rush the trek. But what about experience? Surely if someone have tons of trekking experience in other parts of the world, that counts for something in Nepal, right?
That's actually another myth that David debunks. He's very blunt about this. He says he doesn't care how much experience you have trekking in other countries. Nepal is unique, and that experience doesn't automatically translate.
Okay, so he's not impressed by your Kilimanjaro summit photos.
Not in the slightest. He even has this quote in his article. I don't care if you've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro backwards with a unicorn on your back while wearing a rainbow-colored blindfold. You've not trekked before in Nepal, so you don't know the place, period.
All right, point taken. It's not about being a superhuman trekker. It's about respecting the environment, understanding the local conditions, and being prepared for the unexpected.
Exactly. And part of that is understanding that Nepal is not just about the mountains. It's about the culture, the people, the food.
The food, yes.
People might know about dalbat, but they might not realize that it's essentially lentil soup and rice, which is a staple meal that you'll encounter pretty much everywhere you go.
So even the food can be an adjustment.
It can be, and it's part of the experience.
Well, it's a good reminder that Nepal is the place that requires you to step outside your comfort zone in more ways than one.
Absolutely. And it's not a place for trying to maintain those luxury standards that you might be used to in other parts of the world. David mentions this couple who were staying in a 5-star hotel in Kathmandu, but then they wanted to find the cheapest guide possible for their trek.
Talk about mixed messages.
Right. It's like They were willing to splurge on fancy accommodations, but then skimp on the one thing that could really make or break their trekking experience: a qualified guide.
It's like buying a Ferrari and then putting cheap tires on it.
Exactly. You're not really getting the full benefit of the experience.
So it sounds like David is a big advocate for investing in a quality guide. But what about those seasoned hikers who are used to going solo? Surely they can handle Nepal without a guide.
Right. Well, David actually addresses this head-on with some pretty sobering examples. He mentions a Swiss trekker named Stefan who was experienced but got lost on the Annapurna circuit, twisted his ankle, and needed to be rescued.
Ouch. So even experienced hikers can get into trouble.
Absolutely. It's not just about physical fitness. It's also about local knowledge
Yeah.
and being prepared for the unpredictable mountain weather.
And let's not forget the trails in Nepal are not always well marked.
Right. That's another myth David debunks. The monsoon season, which lasts from June to September, can completely change the trails, washing away signs, creating new obstacles.
So even if you have a map, it might not be accurate.
Exactly. And relying solely on GPS can also be risky, especially in mountainous terrain where signals can be spotty. He tells a story about an Austrian trekker who was furious because his GPS and maps weren't accurate, and it ruined his whole trek.
It's like being in one of those horror movies where the map leads you in circles.
Exactly. And it just highlights the importance of having a good guide who knows the trails, can read the terrain, and can adapt to changing conditions.
It's not a theme park. It's a wild and unpredictable environment.
Right. And that's why having that local expertise is so crucial. David also talks about the dangers of solo trekking particularly. He mentions the story of a trekker who went missing for 5 days in Langtang after twisting his ankle. He was alone with limited communication, and it could have ended very badly.
5 days? That's terrifying.
It is. And it really makes you realize that even a minor injury can become life-threatening when you're alone in a remote area.
It's like the saying, there's safety in numbers.
Exactly. And that brings up this whole question of whether solo trekking should even be allowed in Nepal.
Oh, wow. You mean like banning it altogether?
Yeah, there's a growing movement to do just that, citing safety concerns, the strain on rescue resources.
That's a big debate. What's David's take on it?
Well, he seems to understand both sides of the argument. He acknowledges the concerns, but he also believes that experienced and well-prepared trekkers should have the option to go solo. However, he strongly encourages anyone new to Nepal to hire a guide, especially for their first trek.
So it's like getting your driver's license before hitting the open road. You need to learn the rules and gain some experience before you can navigate safely and responsibly.
Exactly. And that brings us to the question of those who are short on time but still want to experience Everest Base Camp.
Yeah, because I've heard that some people are actually flying there now to avoid the trek altogether.
You can do that, believe it or not, but it's incredibly expensive, costing thousands of dollars.
And I imagine it comes with its own set of risks, right? You're basically teleporting yourself to high altitude with zero acclimatization.
Exactly. It's a recipe for altitude sickness. And it kind of defeats the purpose of even going to Everest Base Camp.
Right.
The trek is part of the experience. It's what prepares you both physically and mentally for the high altitude.
It's like skipping the warm-up before a marathon.
Exactly. David points out that even Everest summiteers trek to base camp to acclimatize. If they don't take the shortcut, why should anyone else?
Good point. So what's the alternative for those who are short on time but still want to get that Himalayan trekking experience?
Well, David suggests choosing a shorter trek that fits their time frame, like the Annapurna Base Camp trek or the Marty Himmel trek. These offer stunning views and challenging trails without requiring weeks of commitment.
Okay, so you can still get that incredible Himalayan experience without sacrificing weeks of your life or risking your health by rushing it.
Exactly. It's about choosing a trek that's right for you.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It sounds like the key takeaway is don't underestimate Nepal. It's not just about pretty scenery. It's a challenging environment that demands respect preparation and a willingness to embrace the unexpected.
And maybe even a good dose of humility.
Well said. So for our listener who's now hopefully brimming with inspiration and maybe a little bit of apprehension, we've got a lot more to unpack. But we're going to take a quick pause here. We'll be back in a moment to delve deeper into David's insights and explore some of the solutions he offers for avoiding those common trekking mistakes.
Stay tuned. All right, so we've established that Nepal is not the place to cut corners or let your ego get in the way of common sense. But let's get practical. What are some concrete things people can do to make their treks safer and more enjoyable?
Well, that's the good news. David doesn't just highlight the problems. He actually offers solutions.
Exactly. And it starts with being informed.
Doing your research.
Right. Don't just rely on those glossy brochures or Instagram influencers. Get some in-depth information from reliable sources like David's website and his guidebooks.
Yeah, speaking of his website, he does have this service called Find a Nepali Trekking Guide. That seems like a great place to start.
It is. It connects you with qualified local guides who know the trails, the culture, all the insider tips that you wouldn't get just from reading a book.
It's like having a personal Sherpa matchmaker.
Exactly. But I know what you're thinking. Doesn't that take away some of the adventure, becoming too reliant on a guide?
That's a good point. Where's the balance between having a safe and enjoyable experience and having an authentic one?
Well, David actually addresses that in his article. He encourages trekkers to use guides as a resource, to learn from them, and to gradually gain the knowledge and confidence to maybe venture out on their own on future treks.
So it's not about being babied. It's about apprenticeship.
Right. You learn the ropes, you gain experience, and then you can spread your wings a bit more on subsequent trips. But for that first trek, it's really wise to have that expert guidance.
And that guidance can go beyond just knowing the trails right.
Yeah.
What about things like water safety, for example? I mean, you mentioned dalbat earlier, which sounds delicious, but
Yeah.
what about the water they use to make that dalbat? Is it safe to drink straight from the tap?
That's a great question, and it's something that a lot of trekkers overlook. David is very clear on this. Don't assume that tap water is safe. Even in tea houses or lodges, you need to use water purification tablets or a good quality filter.
Okay, so pack those purification tablets. They're small but mighty.
They can definitely save you a lot of grief. What
Wow.
else? Oh, yeah, clothing and gear. This is another area where people often make mistakes, and you need to be prepared for all kinds of weather in the mountains.
Layers, right? That's what I always tell people.
Exactly. And don't forget a good pair of trekking boots that are broken in. You do not want to be dealing with blisters when you're miles from civilization.
Oh man, blisters are the worst.
They can really ruin a trek. And speaking of things that can ruin a trek, what about a first aid kit? You need to have one, and you need to know how to use it.
It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. You might be days away from medical help. So being able to handle minor injuries yourself is crucial.
So what else is in David's treasure chest of tips?
Let's see. Oh, yeah. Respecting local customs and traditions. This is so important. Nepal has a rich and vibrant culture, and it's important to be mindful of that when you're trekking there.
Absolutely. It's about being a respectful guest, not a clueless tourist.
Mm.
What are some specific things people should keep in mind?
Well, for example, it's considered rude to point your feet at someone or to walk over someone's legs.
Interesting. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, it's just little things like that. That can go a long way in building positive relationships with the local people. And speaking of building positive relationships in Nepal, that you can actually link certain treks together.
Oh, wow. So you could create your own epic adventure.
Exactly. But he emphasizes the importance of having a good map and compass for this. Even if you're using GPS, you need to be able to navigate independently in case of technology failure or unexpected detours.
Always have a backup plan.
Right. And again, this is where having a guide can be so valuable. They can teach you those essential navigation skills, help you plan your route, and make sure you're well prepared for the challenges ahead.
It's like having a personal trainer for your Himalayan adventure.
Exactly. They push you, they guide you, and they make sure you reach your full potential. And you know what else? They do it all with a smile and a warm cup of tea.
Okay.
So if you're dreaming of trekking in Nepal, don't just pin those inspirational photos to your Pinterest board. Do your homework, choose your trek wisely, and consider hiring a local guide to help you navigate the challenges and unlock the hidden wonders of this incredible country.
And who knows? You might just come back with a story that's even better than those Instagram perfect pictures.
Now you're talking.
Well, I think we've given our listener a lot to chew on. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I want to touch on. David talks about this movement to ban solo trekking in Nepal. What's the latest on that?
Well, it's still a hot topic of debate. Proponents argue that it's necessary to improve safety, reduce the burden on rescue services, and protect the environment. Opponents say it infringes on personal freedom and could harm the local economy.
So there are valid arguments on both sides.
Exactly. And David seems to believe that education and responsible trekking practices are a better solution than an outright ban.
So instead of restricting access, focus on empowering trekkers to make informed choices.
Right. He advocates for promoting awareness of the risks, encouraging the use of qualified guides, and providing resources for trekkers to plan their trips safely and responsibly.
It's like the difference between putting up a fence and teaching people how to swim.
Exactly. One restricts the other, empowers. And in the end, it's about finding a balance that protects both the trekkers and the environment.
Well, I think we've explored just about every nook and cranny of David's insights on trekking in Nepal. We've talked about the common mistakes, the risks, the rewards, and most importantly, how to plan a trek that's both safe and unforgettable.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. But before we say goodbye to the Himalayas, I have one final question for
For
you.
all ears.
If you could give one piece of advice to our listener who's now hopefully brimming with inspiration and maybe a little apprehension, what would it be?
I would say this: don't let fear hold you back. Trekking in Nepal is a challenging but incredibly rewarding experience. Do your research, prepare well, and most importantly, embrace the journey with an open heart and a sense of adventure.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we encourage you to check out David Way's resources, including his Longest Way Home Nepal travel website and his guidebooks, especially Trekking in Nepal.
They're packed with practical information, insider tips, and inspiring stories that will help you plan your own epic adventure.
So lace up those boots, grab your trekking poles, and get ready to experience the magic of the Himalayas.
Happy trekking.
You know, it's interesting. As we've been going through all this advice from David Way's, I've started to think there are a lot of parallels between preparing for a trek in Nepal and just navigating life's challenges in general.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
It's about having the right mindset, the right tools, and the right support system.
Yeah, exactly. In both cases, you need to be prepared for the unexpected, be willing to adapt, and never underestimate the power of a good guide.
It's about respecting your limits, knowing when to push yourself and when to ask for help.
And finding joy in the journey, even when things get tough.
Because, let's be real, whether you're trekking through the Himalayas or just trying to get through a Monday morning, there are going to be moments when you just want to give up.
But that's where resilience comes in. That ability to bounce back from setbacks, to learn from your mistakes, and to keep moving forward, even when you're not sure what's around the corner.
And just like a good trekking guide can help you through those tough spots on a Nepal trek, having mentors, friends, and family who believe in you can make all the difference in life's journey.
It's about having people in your life who lift you up, who challenge you to grow, and who remind you that you're stronger than you think.
And those people, those guides are often the ones who help us see the beauty and the lessons, even in the hard times.
So as you're planning your next adventure, whether it's a trek to Everest Base Camp or a career change, or even just a commitment to taking care of yourself, remember those essential ingredients for success.
Prepare well, seek guidance when you need it, trust your instincts, and don't forget the joy that comes with stepping outside your comfort zone and into the unknown.
Well said. We hope this look at David Way's insights on trekking in Nepal has given you a lot to think about. Maybe some inspiration and even a new perspective on the challenges and rewards of life itself.
It's not just about getting to the finish line. It's about what you learn, who you meet, and how you change along the way.
So go out there, explore, dream big, and never stop looking for adventures both in the mountains and in everyday life.
Happy trails.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks for joining us.